Welcome to the Living While Loving Your Child Through Addiction podcast. Here, we focus on self care as we tend to our own lives while also extending love and compassion to our kids. This podcast offers science backed skills to bring hope and healing to your entire family. I am so excited to share this episode with you today because this is life changing information. We're going to look at biology, conditioning, and patterns that shape how you respond to your child who is struggling with substance use. And more importantly, I'm going to show you a different way to understand your response, one that actually gives you a new way forward instead of just leaving you stuck like everything else out there does. So, this idea for this podcast all started in February when I went away for a week to write my book. And it has just turned into something so much bigger than a book because it really impacted and refined how I see the work that I offer parents. I always tell parents that I'm working with how important it is to take the time to digest all of the information that they consume so that they can process that information and put it to use in their lives. Otherwise, it can just become very confusing. In that same way, it's beneficial for me to take the time to look at the bigger picture of everything that I share with my clients, all of that information. And I did that during my writing process, which was a little different than most people because the accountant in me came out and it all started with this Excel spreadsheet so that I could map out my book and see it all on one page. And I started that process by just writing down every single concept that I teach. And then I organized that list into 20 different categories and categorized everything. And I just kept distilling it down until I only had three categories, which, of course, made everything so much more manageable. And then from there, I just started deciding like which things were most important to include in the book. And as I did that, I started to see something that I'd always known, but I've really struggled to articulate about why I was able to experience such a tremendous personal transformation in the middle of this firestorm of life's most challenging events. And it's important for me to be able to do that, to be able to articulate it, because the better I understand it and can explain it, the better it is, makes it for me to be able to teach it. And I see the same thing in the moms that I work with who are thriving, even though their child is still struggling with substance use or in early recovery. And thriving doesn't mean that everything is just suddenly okay. It does not guarantee any happy endings. In fact, some of the women that I admire most are transforming through some of the hardest circumstances that you can imagine a mom going through. But for me, thriving means that these hard circumstances don't get to dominate your life. They only exist as just one part of your big, beautiful, messy human life. And myself and other moms that I see thriving have one thing in common, and that is that none of us see the work that we do on ourselves as just being about our kids' substance use. We see it as personal development, lifelong learning, and the pursuit of our own fulfillment and happiness as a mom. So I encourage you to stop thinking of any work that you do, even, listening to this podcast as just about your child's substance use and start thinking of it as your own personal development because it's just about so much more than that. And it might start out that way. It started out that way for me that it was just about my daughter and helping her. But it eventually shifted, and I always say that's when the magic started to happen, and to get that full shift out of the identity of just being a mother of a child who's struggling with substance use to the identity that includes all facets of a 3D identity, including I'm a mother, but there's also other fascinating things about me, like I run marathons, I lift weights, I paint, I write short stories, I'm a photographer, I help animals, I have a successful career. Whatever it is on that list that makes you uniquely you, that all of that matters. It all gets to be a part of the story. And your child's substance use is just the catalyst to get you to do this work to becoming that whole 3D person again. I like to think of it like one of those pop-up storybooks where everything is flat and compressed until you open the book. And then every time you turn one of the pages, something lifts and there's depth and dimension and all of these things that you couldn't see before. And it nothing new was added. It was all there to begin with, but it just wasn't accessible until you flip the page and open that. And that's what this work is. It is learning how to see yourself and your whole life differently and clearly to really understand what is happening inside of you because I'm about to tell you so many ways that you are being impacted in ways that you don't even realize. And from that place of understanding, you get to start taking ownership of your experience in a way that actually feels empowering instead of just so heavy. And that's what radical self responsibility is. That is the key to your peace and happiness and emotional freedom. Radical self responsibility is taking full ownership of your life, your happiness, your emotions, your actions, seeing all of your behavior patterns that got you to where you are today. And setting the intention to change those patterns that don't serve you. So if this feels true to you and actually changing your experience feels out of reach, even though it sounds true to you, there's a reason for that. So, one of the reasons is we're all a product of our environment. As children, we were deeply impacted by all kinds of factors in our life that we didn't choose. We're just like little sponges absorbing everything around us. And we were constantly being conditioned by all these outside sources. But when we see that and make the decision that that doesn't get to define our future, and we take full ownership of what happens next, that's when we get to stop living at the effect of our circumstances and become the creators of our future. We're taught from a really young age to ignore our emotions and to outsource our happiness to others. So think back to when you were young. Do you remember being told to stop crying because you were too sensitive or that you hurt somebody's feelings, so you should apologize? It doesn't even matter if what you did was actually hurtful. It only matters that the other person's feelings were hurt, which just means we're all responsible for each other's feelings. Or that you should just be easy and go along with what everybody else wants because you don't want to be seen as difficult. And this is especially true for women. And on top of that, there's something hormonal happening too. We are taught to put others first and to be sugar and spice and everything nice, and that our happiness comes from making others happy. So we get conditioned throughout our lives to think of other needs before our own, or that it's even okay for other people's needs to come at the expense of our needs, because that's what nice girls do. And a good mom sacrifices herself for her family. So when we're in our reproductive years, our hormones push us toward nurturing others and away from our own needs. Yeah, you heard that right. We are wired to experience more of a reward, from our internal reward system, and to experience more fulfillment for caring for others than we experience when we care for ourselves. We also get that internal reward when we go along with the group over our individual needs. So, this is not only learned, it's also biological. We're getting conditioned by society. And at the same time, our neural wiring and hormones are constantly reinforcing it. And this doesn't start to change until we get into perimenopause. And that's why women in that phase of their life wake up one day feeling unfulfilled and wondering how the F their life got to where it is today, and they barely recognize themselves. Because the hormones and all of that conditioning was pushing us to take care of everybody else first often at the expense of ourselves. And as we lose that biological drive for caretaking for others and that drive to sacrifice ourselves starts to fade, then there's room for a desire to start taking care of ourselves. And our happiness moves from being focused on the care from others, or our happiness stops coming from our caring for others and moves internal and starts to come from us caring for our own wants and needs. But this is really disorienting because we've had a lifetime of being conditioned to do something else and this internal drive to do it. And this biological shift often coincides with, you're either getting ready to be or are an empty nester at that time. So we're used to all this caretaking and our responsibilities for others providing structure in our lives because that's what our lives are built around. And now that structure is gone and everything is changing. So that's what makes this phase part of what makes this phase so challenging, because on top of that, it also takes a while for our reward system to recalibrate. So we haven't recalibrated our reward system to where we receive the most reward from doing things for ourselves that we enjoy, right? That's a process. So while you're during that, time of experimenting with trying to figure out what you might like to do for yourself, nothing actually feels that rewarding. And so it starts to feel kind of helpless. And on top of that, we're feeling, this guilt about this desire to take care of ourselves. So it's just really a difficult transition. And it's truly disorienting to navigate because we aren't even sure what's going on inside of us. I had no idea that this is was happening when I was going through it. This was, I don't know why, but when I was around 40, I naturally went through menopause really young. So this biological change for me coincided with Helana's start of her substance use. In my life at that time, had I known what was going on, would have been so much more balanced. Knowing what was happening to me biologically, that I was going from this shift and truly understanding that deep self care and understanding myself and my needs would have actually made me a better caregiver because I felt more fulfilled. But I just didn't understand or know any of this back then. And that's why I think this is so important for me to talk about because, as parents, we're shamed and we're labeled and we're stigmatized for how we respond to our kids' substance use when really our whole lives set us up for that response. So instead of getting pathologized for it, let's embrace our humanness and work with that and thrive. But before we get into thriving, let's talk about what happens to us when we're going through menopause. Our system is moving away from the desire or drive to caretake and toward self discovery. But suddenly, there's this crisis happening with your child's substance use. Now it just gets even more complicated because throw in all that grief, right? And most of the time, people don't have a name for what they're experiencing, that they don't recognize that it's grief. It's grief for this loss of your identity as a caretaker. It's grief for the loss that we thought that our kids would have, grief for the loss of the life that we imagined our kids would have, grief for the loss of what we thought our experience would be like as a mother, and grief for the loss of ourselves is we took care of everybody else and forgot who we were or what we cared about. And there's also this tug of war happening inside of us. One end of the rope is this new desire for self care and self discovery. But at the other end of the rope, there's still that part of us that wants to be a caretaker and knows that our child needs help and support. But we're also feeling a little bit resentful about it because when are we going to get some time? When are we going to get some peace? Like, aren't our kids supposed to grow up and become independent so that we can enjoy our relationship with them in a different way? And then don't forget all the hormonal stuff that's happening. There's our estrogen and oxytocin are declining, but our cortisol and our adrenaline are increasing because we're so full of fear about our kids' substance use and all the stuff that goes with that. We've got brain fog because our hormones are changing and because of the chronic stress because of our kids' struggle with substance use. And just for fun, both of those situations mess with our sleep. So we're completely exhausted and frazzled. And on top of that, some of us are parenting grandkids because our kids can't parent their kids because of their substance use. And then others of us are caring for our aging parents. So all of this is happening in our lives. And finally, deep inside, part of us wants to care for ourselves, even though we just have no idea where to start. So instead of having this nice, quiet, empty nest for self discovery and transformation, like a caterpillar in its safe little cocoon while it transforms into a beautiful butterfly, we're just in utter chaos and we're craving peace, but we can't find it. And so we end up asking ourselves these questions like, why am I like this? What's wrong with me? Why can't I calm down? Why do I keep reacting when I swear I wouldn't? Why isn't anything that I'm trying working? And all of those questions have answers. Those answers are not that you're codependent or you just need to detach. There are actual answers to those questions that help you understand yourself. I've just answered a lot of them. You deserve those answers because you matter in this story too. And not just as like the supporting character to your child's recovery, but as like a full human being who deserves to understand herself and enjoy her life. So there's two roads that are available from here. On one road, you stay focused on your child, entirely on them, trying to figure out where you went wrong and how to fix it, you know, managing, reacting, waiting for the other shoe to drop, outsourcing your happiness to whether they're okay or not today. And that road keeps you powerless. And you've probably already felt how exhausting this road is because on this road, there is no room for you to matter. But there's a second road. And that second road has a much more effective focus. Not how do I do this, but who am I in this? What do I need to understand about myself so that I can show up differently? The most powerful thing that you can do for your child is to fully understand yourself. You cannot fully understand what is happening with your child until you understand what is happening inside of you. When you understand yourself, your conditioning, your biology, your behavior patterns, then you stop being confused by them and you start seeing that bigger picture like I did when I stopped and looked at everything on one page for my book. That second road is paved by radical self responsibility. And that is the only road that actually leads somewhere other than stuck. Even if you have very little responsibility for a situation, but you take 100% responsibility for the impact that it has on you, you have 100% of the power to change that experience. Imagine walking through a parking lot and you get hit by a car because the driver wasn't paying attention and you just break your leg. But it's a pretty bad break, so it's gonna take more than a cast to fix it, and you're gonna need some physical therapy. But if you focus on how it's not your fault that you were hit, and you get stuck in how it's not fair, and you don't take 100% ownership of your healing, you'll never fully regain use of that leg. But if you decide that even though it's not fair that this happened to you, and even though it's not your fault, you're going to take 100% full ownership of your healing, then you will regain full use of that leg again. And it is the same thing with taking 100% ownership of how you experience your child's substance use and how it impacts your life. People who believe that they have control over their life are happier. But the problem is, we're constantly told as parents that we're powerless. And when we feel powerless over our lives and our lives feel outside of our control, then we have less happiness, less resilience, and we have a lower quality of life. And it's been proven in studies that the belief that you can influence your circumstances matters more than the actual circumstances themselves. So that means that when your child is struggling with substance use and you're told that you're powerless, it feels like the circumstance is in control of your life. And because you think it is, it actually is. But when you know that you have influence over your circumstances, now you have so much higher quality of life. So if you're listening to this and something is starting to make sense in you in a way that it hasn't before, but you start seeing things through a different lens that actually explains why this has been so hard, instead of blaming yourself, know that you were shaped by your experiences, your biology, your environment, and then you end up in this situation with your son or daughter that would be incredibly hard for anybody. And so when you start to understand that and have more compassion for yourself and understand what you've been going through, you stop thinking, asking yourself, what's wrong with me? Which, that question just leads to all you think about is all the things that are wrong with you. And instead, you start asking, how can I understand myself better? The most powerful thing that you can do for your child is to fully understand yourself. You can't start to understand them and what's happening with them until you understand what's happening inside of you. That was the magic key for me, was starting to really understand myself, help me understand my daughter, and just have so much more compassion for her and not be so reactive. So that's why when I work with parents, that it's never just about their child, even though it seems in our minds that that's what it should be. It's always about them as a person as well, about identifying their needs and making a plan for meeting those needs in a reliable way instead of outsourcing that or needing their child to be okay so that they can be okay. And that's part of the basis for understanding yourself, is to be able to even tune into those needs. In my Peaceful Mom group, craft skills are just one part of what we do, because this isn't a problem that you solve by focusing more and more on your child, because as I said several times, that's what keeps us stuck. Because if this were only about our kids, we would have solved it by now. We've already been focused on our kids. That's what everybody does automatically. And if that was the answer, all these moms wouldn't be struggling the way they are. They'd be thriving. This is about something so much bigger than that. This is about you stepping into yourself in a way that you never have before, becoming more than just that role of mom and allowing yourself to be a full multidimensional person again, like that pop-up book you open, because nobody's worth can be tied to just one thing. Our worth can't just be tied to our career or our child or anything. That is such a setup for suffering. But when we have a life and a sense of self and something that really belongs to us, a full 3D identity, then that tide starts to turn and we're not consumed by what our kids are doing. Not that we stop caring, we just aren't so consumed by it anymore. And get to stop reacting from fear all the time. And then our kids don't have to carry the burden of the weight of being responsible for our happiness. They feel that pressure. And they also feel that pressure lift when we shift our lens towards creating our own happiness. And when that pressure lifts, it creates space for them to focus on themselves and to start their own healing. I see this over and over again. I saw it in my relationship with my daughter. I see it with the families that I work with. When moms start taking that radical self responsibility, it just automatically shifts how they show up. They're just able to show up in a way that they feel better about. And that opens the door for more of a shift with their child, too. And none of this is about blame. Blame just keeps us stuck in the problem. It's about our responsibility for ourselves in any life circumstance. It's about taking full ownership of your life experience, of your thoughts, of your emotions, your actions, and how you show up for yourself in your own life. So if you're listening to this and thinking, that's what I've been missing, I want you to sign up for a Road to Recovery call where we will take everything that you have just heard and look at how that is showing up in your life, your patterns, your next steps. You've already been focused on your child. You know what that road feels like. The Road to Recovery call is getting on that other road. The link to book the Road to Recovery call, it's on my website and it's also in the podcast episode show notes. So, thank you for listening to this episode today. If you found this episode helpful, I would really appreciate it if you left a 5-star review because those reviews help other parents decide that this podcast is worth listening to, and that helps them get the support that they need. So until next time, remember that taking care of yourself is not a luxury because you matter too.